Okay, so it's part 2 of lesson 3, and we've been looking at some different code, different Razor syntax methods. So we're going to compile a little list. I'm going to start with the table at the back. Angela, your table. Yep. Okay, which files? First, maybe tell me which view to open up. Tell me which view you're looking at and which line. Okay, so in login, yeah, and which, okay, so at using, so. Right, so that. Okay, all right. Okay, this table, what file did you look at? Login as well? Okay, what line in login? Okay, that's section scripts. So what would that do? Okay, so what does that line of code do? Sorry? Okay, yeah, but that's true. What specifically? When you say something. The important thing is that's used for adding client-side JavaScript. So we see that here. So it's bundled a bunch of jQuery scripts together. So we won't actually see this code at runtime if we go and look how this renders. So that includes these two files, both the jQuery and Bootstrap's JavaScript, which requires jQuery. Okay. Table over on the left. Okay. Okay, which file is that? Okay, so in send code on line 9, right? HTML.anti-forgery token. Okay, and all right, that's exactly what it does. Why? What's the point of this? You're getting warmer. It's definitely an anti-hacking device. That's exactly what it does. It prevents cross-site scripting attacks. What is a cross-site scripting attack? How does this work? This is one of the most common vulnerabilities in web applications. How does it work? Well, that's similar. That's an SQL injection attempt. Not quite the same as a cross-site scripting attack. It could be, but the key is cross-site. Okay, let's look at it this way. So we have this site, right? So we have this bigger. Here's our domain. So there's our login form. So there's the URL of our form. Problem with cross-site scripting is if this is your site and this is mine, I can build a form that will post to your login. Right? So then I can try and attack your login screen, not by hacking your login, but by creating a post attempt on my own domain. In fact, I don't even need a domain. I can use a tool like this, which you're all going to use later on in the course. I don't even need a site. I can just do this. Let this load. Come on, you can do it. Okay, so here's your site that I want to attack. So I can just set up I can set up a post request, and I can set up I can actually submit this. So I can send data to your forms from anywhere, from my own website, from a tool like Postman or Fiddler. You have no idea where the data is coming from. This is one of the most common. It's in the top 10, actually. We'll look at this later, but I can tell you exactly how high up this is on the list of most common web application security flaws. Where is it? It'll be somewhere in the top 10. We'll look at this later when we get into security. But here's the list. Cross-site scripting attacks will be certainly one of the most common. There. So in both 2013 and 2017 version, 2017, it's down in the item number 7. Seventh most common vulnerability in web applications. So if users are sending data to our forms, we want to make sure they are sending them from our forms. So what this token does is it generates a hidden code in the form. And when that form is submitted, we check that token and make sure that token is included and it was generated on our server. So if I go here to the login form, we won't actually see the token, but all of our forms in .NET MVC applications, they should all have this call, and we should be validating this token. I'll show you what it looks like when this finishes loading. If this finishes loading. Come on, you can do it. So this line is to prevent that. So we don't see anything, but if I view the source, and we scroll down, you'll notice, so here's the start of my form. It posts to itself as a method of post right here. It generates a hidden field called request verification token. It's hidden so the user doesn't see it. And there's a long encrypted string. So if we try to submit to this login form from a tool like Postman, the very first thing in our controller method, if we go and look at our login controller, Here's our post method. So the very first thing that happens is we're validating that token. So all of our form post methods we write, we're always going to include that validate anti-forgery token method in the view, and then we're going to have this call in our post. So it will check and make sure that that post came from our domain. It didn't come from anywhere else. If it does, we're not going to process it. Okay, so that's a good one. We're going to use that in a few weeks when we get into authentication. Giselle? Yeah, it's like the server keeps, it's automatically handled on the server, right? So the server checks to make sure that that token, it includes information about the domain and the request, where it comes from. So it's validating and making sure it's coming from the right place. Well, you know what? We'll actually try it later on when we use this. We'll try, see what happens if we put that in a different request from somewhere else. It will get blocked. Yep. Yep. Correct. Correct. Even if I refresh the page, I'm going to get a different token value. We may or we may not. You probably implemented CAPTCHA already in your PHP class. I don't know if you did or you didn't. Usually when I teach that class, I do have time for CAPTCHA, so I don't know if we'll do it. So notice if I refresh here, I'm going to have different token values. So this starts with E20. This one starts with 1JI. So even a refresh a minute later gives me a new token. So it will always be unique. Okay, another part of this very long table. Somebody else have a different method? Okay, Noor, which file did you find that in? In register? Okay, right here. So line 13, we had HTML validation summary. What does that do? Here, we can see this in action. So I go to the register page. Well, I put in 2 different passwords. It also asked for an email, which I didn't provide. So there's our validation summary in action, right? There are rules built in to our project that violated 3 different validation rules. So it uses that validation summary. It's using a Bootstrap class of text danger, which is why that text shows in red. So that's what we see here. So there's an optional parameter where we can add a class to that validation. So this is already kind of built in here. So handy for us to use. This table, what file did you use?
Reset password.
Okay, on reset password, yeah, what line should we look at?
Line 18.
Okay, line 18.
HTML.text4. What does it use the text field on the screen to enter any kind of text, and for this one it's email.
Okay. It's not simply setting up a text box, but it actually, if we look, it's connected to a particular column in our model. So here our model, we have a view model, which is similar to a model. And in here we have fields like email. So if I hit M dot, right, there are the fields we have, code confirm. So it's setting up a text box, but also binding it to a particular model property. And again, we can set up HTML attributes like a CSS class. Okay. What file should we look at? Okay. Okay. Yep. Similar to the text box for generates an HTML label. The text is bound to a model property name. So instead of hard coding an HTML label that says email, whatever the property name is, that automatically appears on the label. So if we update this property in the model, the label will automatically change on any views that are tied to it, rather than hard coding those values directly into the user interface. Okay, you guys have another? Okay, so in the login, on what line? This one here, you mean? Validation message 4? What does that do? We have both the validation message 4 as well as the validation summary. The summary lets us show all of the error messages in one place. The validation message 4 is for a particular field if we violated the rules and we want to show the message there. Okay, last group. Let's have a different one. Yep. Yep. Okay, sorry, could you repeat that one more time? Okay, so it generates password input field where users can't see the characters. If we look, that's how this would generate an HTML input box with an add to type equals password attribute. So as we're typing, if someone's looking over our shoulder, they can't see our password being typed. All right, that's most of the important ones. There's one more. I think I've asked everybody. We've basically gone over them all. There's one important one that we are going to be using on one other line. Anybody see the one other important one we maybe want to add to our list? Yeah, that begin form. So what do you suppose that does? Yeah, so this is our Razor syntax, our server side, using server-side code to generate a new form, where we can set up the action, whether it does post or get, and then any attributes. And we're going to use the begin form to create our forms for adding and editing. Right? We'll see it on reset password. We'll see it on all of these. register. Every one of them, you notice, has got this begin form. So that will just generate a standard HTML form tag at runtime. So we don't have to use that. We could just hard code in and form tag in our HTML. But the .NET MVC convention is to use begin form, excuse me, for generating all of our forms. Okay, pretty good list. I'll leave this up on Blackboard at around whatever time you roll in. If it's before 11 o'clock next week, make sure you look over this because there'll be some quiz questions that are going to come straight out of here. But these are most of the methods, the new code we're going to see in the Razor views. So at least you've had a chance to look at it. So now as we start to build out other things in the application, we've already at least had some exposure to the new stuff we're going to see in our views. Okay, we're going to do a few other things with our project. And then we might look at actually getting at least our everything store database, starting to get that configured. First thing I would need to do is in my repository, I want to create a README file. Okay? And we'll go over doing this because it's important that you do it in your assignment. Now, I could create the README file here, but I don't recommend doing it. What's the problem if I create the README file on GitHub? It will work, but it can create a bit of a problem.
Next time
I could edit it.
next time when we push the files, it will be as our local.
Right. If I'm doing the work on most of the work and making the changes on my local machine, if I go ahead and make changes directly to the repository, now I have a synchronization problem. I have two separate versions. I've got one version here with the README file, and I don't have that version on my laptop. So if I go to push, Git is going to complain and say, you can't push because you have changes. You need to do a pull first. So that can get messy, and then sometimes it won't even let me push. So my suggestion is rather than create the README here, I'm better off to create the README file in Visual Studio, and then I can push it. Well, if you created it here already, then what you want to do is do a git pull on your computer. That will copy the README file from GitHub to your machine. You can try it. You can try it. It may or may not. So I'm going to create the file within Visual Studio. So here's how I'm going to create it. I want it right in the root of my solution. I don't want it in the web project. It has to be right at the root of my Git repository. Otherwise, it doesn't automatically show up when I go to my repository. So I'm going to go right to my top level where it says Solution to Projects. And I'm going to right click and choose Add a New Item. Now, there isn't actually a template for a README file in here. So I'm just going to pick the very first item, which is a text file, but I'm going to call it readme.md. And following the GitHub conventions, README is in all caps and MD is all lowercase. That's what GitHub expects a file to be called. Anybody know what the MD extension actually stands for? What it means? No, good guess. Give you a hint. It's kind of related to the extension HTML. What does HTML stand for? Hypertext Markup Language. Getting warmer. Give you a hint. README file is not, it supports HTML, but it's not actually a markup file. Yeah, MD stands for Markdown. So it's basically a simplified document that supports HTML. I'm going to create my text file called readme.md, and I just get a blank file. So I can write standard HTML here. I'll put on a heading. Close up some of the files we were just looking at. We don't need them anymore. So then what I'm going to do is just go to my home page that we created, and I'm just going to copy that description. Just a description of what the project is and the technologies we've included. So I wrote this in class last week. You can say anything you want about it. I'll just grab that paragraph, copy it. Say whatever you like. Later on, in the next week or two, we'll publish this to Azure. We'll probably do it next week. So I'll include the link to Azure at that point. So when you come to the repository at the bottom, you can just click and then view the live site. And you'll want to do that in your assignment. Now I have a local README file. I can use my Team Explorer to commit and push this to GitHub. Then if I refresh my repository, the README file will automatically show up. This content will show up below my list of files. Again, you don't have to copy my content here. Say anything you want. I got out of bed on a snowy Wednesday to create this project because I wanted to get my 1% for my quiz mark. So I go to Team Explorer and go to Home, Changes, README. Then I'll commit and push. It'll prompt me to save my solution. I'll just say yes to that. So it says it pushed. And now if I go back and refresh at the root of my repository, right, this will go away and the content of my README file should show up. So here's my README. And typically we'll also use the README file to document our code. If we're building an open source library, we want to publish and make available to other people. We might use the README file to document how it works. We might put instructions for configuration. If you download this repository, you need to do these things on your machine in order to run it, whatever. So you'll want to do this in your assignment. Going to make one other change today to the everything store. Well, one or two, and that's also going to force us to update the README file after. The last thing I want to do with this today is I want to update the look of our everything store. Right? We just kind of get the default Bootstrap template. I want it to look a little different. Now, I'm going to do this the quick and dirty way, the easy way, which is I'm going to go find a free Bootstrap theme and overwrite the existing Bootstrap with a theme. And then I'll make a reference in my README as to where the theme comes from. So I'm not taking credit for it. So on Blackboard, I'm going to go back up to my tools and resources. And if I scroll down, right to the very bottom, I've given you a link here. Some of you have probably seen this site before. We're using Bootstrap 3 And Bootswatch, some of you have used this site before probably, it's got free themes for Bootstrap that we can use. So if we scroll down here, there's some different themes. So I'm going to pick a theme, and then I just need to download and overwrite a couple of the Bootstrap files that came with our Visual Studio project, and it will reskin the whole site for us. So you can pick any one you like. I think maybe I'll use this one. So we'll actually have a dark site. You don't have to pick this one. You don't have to do this at all. This is entirely optional. So if I just click download, all I really need is I want to download these two files into my content directory and overwrite the existing Bootstrap file and minified Bootstrap. And then if I refresh the site, the whole theme should change. So I'm going to pick these. You can, as I said, totally optional. I'm going to download each of these files. Whoops. So I'll right click, save my link. And I'll go into the Everything Store and go into the Everything Store, which is the web project, and then content. So here are my Bootstrap files. I'm going to overwrite the minified version, and then I'll do the same thing with the full sourced version. I'm just going to save. Yes, I'm good to overwrite it. And then I'm going to right click the second file, save that one to the same folder, and I'll overwrite it. Good question. What is the difference? Why are there two? What's different between these two files, Angeli? Good guess, but no, it's something else. But a good guess. Sorry? Yeah, which one removes the spaces? And why would we have two versions, one with all the spaces and one without? Right, okay. So we would typically use this one. Well, let's look at the two files. They actually have all the same classes. Here's the non-minified version. Yeah. Here's the minified version. So we're going to use this one as we're doing our CSS because we can actually read the file. But at runtime, typically on this web server, we want to deploy the minified version because it's a smaller file, right? It loads faster without all the spaces. So it's a performance and an overhead issue. So now that I've done that, if I reload any page, I've got a new skin. So the only other thing I'm going to do is I'll copy this preview link, and I'm going to add a link to this on both my home page and my README. I'll give credit to where the theme comes from, because I didn't design it myself. Someone was nice enough to publish this and let us use it. We at least should give them credit for the work. Both my README file and say, what did they call this thing? Superhero. I'll just put a link both in my README file. And I'll also add this link onto the site homepage. So when the site comes up, we know that this theme comes from somebody else. Excuse me. I'm also going to update the link to my repository. So that's better. So I've updated both the home page so now rather than linking just to my main GitHub page, it links right to my repository. And I've also linked where to the source of our CSS. So I've added that to my README file as well. Give me one sec. I'm just going to push the updates to GitHub. So now this link is included in my GitHub repository as well. So I'll go back. The Team Explorer again changes. I added the superhero theme from Bootwatch. I'll commit and push. So now my GitHub repository, it includes my new theme, and I've linked to the source of that theme as well. Question over here? Sorry? What browser are you using? Chrome? Chrome is infamous for caching your CSS. Go to open it in an incognito window or clear your cache. Often with Chrome, you don't see CSS changes. So try in a private or incognito window and clear your cache. Is that the problem? Okay. So what I would suggest for your assignment, this is only one site. For your assignment, I would recommend pick a different theme than you did for the Everything Store. So you have two different looking projects by the end of the semester. Okay? So either find a different theme here. This is only one site. There are many other places you can find Bootstrap 3 themes for free. Okay? All I ask is if you find one, just make a reference in the README file where it came from. Okay? So I'm not giving you credit for doing the CSS work that you just downloaded from another developer. Okay. So that was everything we wanted to do with the Everything Store today. A couple other things. We have a few more minutes. I'm going to give you a lab, which I will walk you through now. And then I will also kind of show you and get you started on installing SQL Server so we can start working with the database next week. Okay? It's kind of a big install. Again, it's like a gigabyte, so you probably want to download and install it here at school. So let me give you the lab first. So your lab is under tab. It's lab 2. Pretty much based on what we did today, you have until next Monday at 5 o'clock to do it. Okay? Won't take you very long. Make a new solution, call it lab 2. You don't have to pick, no unit testing, no authentication. So just accept the default, just check off the little checkbox on the bottom right. If you have a newer version of Visual Studio, it will say create Git repository. So check that. If you have an older version, choose add to source control, because both of those will automatically generate the git ignore file you need. On the layout file, change the page title and the main link in the nav bar so it says Comp2084 Lab 2 instead of my .NET application or whatever the default text is. Okay, add your name and student number to the footer. All these things should be relatively easy. Create a controller called a categories controller. So you're going to create a new empty controller. Visual Studio will automatically generate an index method in there. You then have to create a view called categories index, and it will show this list: food, tech, and sports. Just like we did in class today, you're then going to make each one of those a link. If I click tech, it takes me to the next page, which would be category details. passes in the name of the category, and the details page will show a message saying you selected, and then the name of the category. So basically just a replica of what we did today in class with the products. You can even hard code these values right into your index view. You don't have to make a list of categories in the controller and pass that data. You can just hard code them. That's fine. To submit the lab, and you can use the view bag to show the name of the selected category. Create a new repository on GitHub, call it Comp2084 Lab 2, submit the link on Blackboard. So you're basically just kind of redoing what we did today with products, with categories. Have 5 days to do it, it's lots of time. So I suggest do the lab first, get it out of the way, and also start thinking about next week. I'm going to ask a bunch of people in class, hey, what are you building for assignment 1? I would hope most of you have not only have an idea, but that you've actually started building your assignment. Okay, questions about the lab? Okay, last thing I want you to do, you don't have to finish it now, but just to show you before next week's class. So I did take kind of the database that we sort of sketched out together last week. I've drawn the ERD, so that's here, so you have an idea. And I kept these tables here. I didn't define them. We may or we may not get to them. So if we need to flesh those out later, we will. Primarily, we're going to work with these tables. I've created an SQL script that we're going to run in class next week that will build this database for us. It'll create the tables with all the columns and all of the relationships, primary and foreign key constraints, as well as the auto incrementing primary keys. So we'll run that near the start of class next week. In order to run it, you guys need to have the database software on your machines. So where do you get it? You got a couple of options. So in Tools and Resources, here's a link to the SQL Server download page. You can download it straight from Microsoft. The developer edition is fine. You can also get it if you want the professional or enterprise version. You can get those from the Imagine store. Those versions are bigger. You don't really need them, but if you like the idea of getting a really expensive piece of software for free, then go ahead and install it. I don't even know what the enterprise version licensing costs these days. Let's see what they're selling for. It also doesn't really matter if you have 2017 or a slightly older version. They're generally backwards compatible and interoperable. So for enterprise, oh, awesome. Per core, $14,000 US. You can actually get this from the Imagine store if you really want that version. You got to have a lot of hard drive space to run it. So I would recommend, you could probably just get the developer, or it says community, I guess that would be Express Edition. One important thing when you install it, okay? When you run the SQL Server installer, you can accept almost all of the defaults, but there's one screen where it asks you to choose your components. Got a whole bunch of components with checkboxes. By default, nothing will be checked. If you just click next, it installs the program, but there's no working tools there. The very first component at the top says database engine. And then underneath it, there are a whole bunch of components. That's the server itself. You need to check database engine and all of the subcomponents. Otherwise, you've installed the program, but you actually have no server to create and run databases on. Okay. So make sure you check the database engine component. All the other components outside of database engine, you don't have to install. Questions? Yes. If you have an Express version, that's fine. If you have an older version, that's fine as well. Mo, was that your question as well? So if you already have a version of SQL Server running, you should be fine. And you don't have to upgrade. Okay. Please make sure you install this before the beginning of class next week. Occasionally, people have issues with it. If you have an issue, make an appointment, come to office hours, before next Wednesday, come either Wednesday morning or make an appointment on Monday, okay, so that I can help you. Because basically my expectation right after next week's class is we're gonna take this script, though I think I put it in today's folder. It's already on Blackboard. We're gonna run it on our local database and make sure everybody has a copy of the Everything Store on their machine. And then we're gonna look at how do we work with it and connect our Visual Studio project to the database. So the software takes a long time to download and install. You don't want to be doing it during class next week because then you're behind and you can't work with it, okay? So please install it over the next week. Probably I would suggest do it today or tomorrow so you can come and get help before next week. Okay? So those are your 2 things to do before next week. Finish the lab, 3 things. Finish the lab, install SQL Server, get started on assignment 1, at least thinking and planning about what you're going to build. Okay? Drive safe. Walk safe, take your bus safely. See you guys next week.